Unashamed, the recovery podcast.
And hello, recovery family. Welcome to a new season and another episode of the Unashamed Recovery Podcast, where it is okay to not be okay. I'm your host, Josh, an addict celebrating recovery from a 20-year porn and sex addiction. And new this season is my good friend and co-host, Drew.
Hey, Unashamed family. I'm Drew. I celebrate in recovery, and I deal with a 17-year life of addiction, life struggles, living a life of insanity as well.
On today's episode, we once again bring you a true story of redemption and hope in overcoming addiction. At the center of what the Unashamed Recovery Podcast is all about is breaking the shame and the stigma of addiction and recovery, one episode at a time.
And we're breaking that barrier by having honest and real conversations with real people and real recovery, by being unashamed and telling our stories, shining our light of freedom for those still trapped in the darkness.
These stories feature people who have faced a lifelong battle of addiction or hurts and habits and hang-ups, and they've hit rock bottom. They've overcame that hell of addiction, and they have found lasting sobriety, whatever that may look like for them. These stories are raw and unfiltered, but most importantly, they are real, to show others that we do recover and that there is hope and that there is life outside of addiction.
Now, these stories may contain adult language and adult content and may be a trigger. To keep these stories as real and true in nature as we can, we don't edit or cut anything out. We honor those who are willing to share by telling their whole story, even the dark parts, the ugly parts of it. So viewer discretion is advised.
Recovery fam, it is a proven fact that we heal once the shame is gone. And shame dies when we share our story in a safe place. And I hope that this podcast is a safe place for all, for those who are breaking their anonymity and breaking their shame by sharing, and also a safe place for everyone listening.
There is healing in sharing our secrets and our stories of addiction, our trials, our failures, and all of our powerlessness, and even more healing in hearing how others have recovered.
So, without further delay, let's meet today's guest. And you don't need no introduction of who our guest is today. Our guest is the same guest we had last episode.
It's me, guys. It's
Yeah.
me. I'm back for part 2. So
It's true.
We're going to do this all over again. You ready?
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about where my life started to unravel this time. You know, last time we talked about the root issue. So now we're going to talk about the consequences of some of those actions that I made. And we're going to talk about more action that ended up happening in this one. So,
Yeah, this
So
is
we
part
begin.
2. So if you haven't checked out part 1, stop what you're doing and go listen to that now. And then come back and hit that play button and pick up right here at this spot.
We're even going to touch on some of the episode 4. What was it? Relapse. The great downfall of the bedrock, so to speak, of why I needed to make a change. So yeah.
So stick tuned. So Drew, take me back to those significant moments that you can remember during some of those arrests, some of the more memorable moments.
All right, so you want the highlight reel is what you're asking for,
Yeah.
basically. So instead of giving you just a highlight reel, we're gonna dig in anyway. So, the one that was really one of the most significant arrests to me came on it came right before my second child was about to be born. So I was working as a bouncer at a bar, you know,
the ideal place for any addict to be. But with my crazy lifestyle, I just didn't want to hold any other kind of job down. So that was it, so that arrest, I'd been at a bar all night, snorting coke with the owners of the bar. We'd been drinking pretty heavily. It was one of those. It was February. I remember that it was super cold outside, and the mother of my child, who was pregnant at the time, had to come down to the bar to drive me home. And then I argued with her the entire time and told her, no, I want to take the car to the house. It was just one of those situations where I was being stubborn and hard-headed. So I had a decision to make, and I made the decision drunk and high. And so that decision ended up ultimately leading me to being arrested, and that was the first stay I had in jail. But the details of that, the deets is what the kids say today.
The deets.
Let me get the deets, bro. So, but anyway, the way that ended up going was, so we get in the car. She gets in her car. She's gonna follow me, and I can't see out of my windshield to save my life. But here I am, drunk as all get out, sticking my head out the window. Kind of the Ace Ventura type deal.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I was trying that. I was making some ultimately great decisions. You know what I mean? But the whole thing was we ended up passing a cop. Passed him, and I just went ahead and pulled over off to the side of the road because I knew I couldn't see. And so I was going to try to wait for the windshield to de-thaw a little bit. He comes swooping in behind me, and he's just like, man, you almost hit my car. And I was like, I did not almost hit your car. Which, the mother of my child, she's back there chiming in too. He didn't almost hit your car. All that was kind of going on throughout this whole situation. But what ended up happening, I get out of the car. He's sitting there talking to me, and I was like, well, if I'm going to be here for a minute, can I turn my car off? Good to turn the car off. He ends up yanking me out of the car after he said I could turn the car off or whatever. And the reason why this is so memorable is because this was just, he ended up pulling a gun. Yeah.
Wow.
Ended up pulling a gun, sticking the gun in my face, and he was just like, I know what you're doing over here. I was like, what am I doing over here? He thought I was selling drugs to the mother of my child because we had both pulled over and stopped. So they ended up running the drug dog through the car like 14 times at this point. I'm on the ground, been maced at this point, had the gun drawn. So I'm sitting there just like, dude, what in the world is going on? Jesus. But the whole thing is, and I'm blaming him for all this. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, it's his fault.
Oh, dude, you know what? You should have just left me alone. I was just letting him, but really, he probably ultimately smelled alcohol. To be honest, I'm telling you, I say I was drunk. But, sitting there or whatever, they send the dog through the car 14 times. They throw the little the dog toy in there, and he goes in there. And the dog never hit on the car. But another officer ends up pulling up, and the drug dog actually stops, and he sits. And, I guess that's, indicating that he hit on the car or whatever. And I know for a fact I didn't have anything in the car. But being in my drunken stupor, I was just, I was out there.
Yeah.
My entire lifestyle was out there. They already knew it at this point because of some of my other, previous, decisions and some of the previous arrests. This is just one of those significant ones. But either way, so the one of the task force guys ended up coming down there, and they pulled out this baggie, with it had extra little baggies in it or whatever. And they were like, well,
a baggie for the baggies?
A bag. It was like a Ziploc bag. So yeah, it sounds crazy, but I guess it was like a Ziploc evidence bag. Yeah, is what they had. But what I saw was a baggie full of baggies. And I was just kind of like, "What is that?" And, you shut up. And I'm just kind of like, I'm sitting there, and then, the mother of my child, she's still screaming for me to shut up and don't say anything. And I was like, well, let my dad get down here, who has saved me through everything, even though we did not talk. We were having, we talked about that in the first episode. My relationship with him was still on the rocks. But at the same time, like, he still was coming down there to, to save me. And that's one of those things, like, talking about it now and looking back on it, it's amazing how our families still love us through our addictions. You know what I mean? They're still there no matter
That's right.
how much we villainize them. You know, we make them the villains of the story. Or we can say, man, they never cared, but the whole time they love us through it anyway. It's just they just get to a point of they don't know how to anymore.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he comes, he's coming down there or whatever, but he never made it down there while I was still there. So they end up taking me to jail for possession of cocaine with intent to distribute was the initial charge. And this was days. I'm talking about days before my second child was supposed to be born. So I'm sitting back in Lauderdale County Jail, and that was a big situation to me, because this is a felony, I'm looking at a felony. I was looking at 5 years, but we ended up getting a lawyer. I ended up getting off with probation. It was non-adjudicated probation, but through my stupidity and my insane wanting to live crazy and I just didn't care. I was like, well, I beat that. So guess what I went back to doing?
Yeah.
Drugs and alcohol still. And that ultimately...
Didn't learn nothing.
I did. I stopped for a little while. And I think to honestly say and look back at it now, addicts, man, we have these many attempts to stop, whether we realize it or not. But if we don't have the tools, if we don't go to meetings, if we don't find a sponsor, we don't do all the things that we're supposed to do, the things you hear about when you get to rehab finally, because trying to do it on your own just ain't gonna kick it. And that was one of those things, with the help of the mother of my child, I was trying to stop, but one of the old friends that we had who sold dope came by the house. He was like, man, I need you to hold this here for me. You're done with that stuff, right? And I was like, oh yeah, man. But ultimately, no. That ended up probably being one of the worst decisions ever, was to say yeah to that. Because once again, if you don't change people, places, and things, the same things are going to end up happening. You're going to live the life of insanity, hoping that it changes, but it never does. But when we're talking about arrest, that story, man, that was very impactful because that was like the first time that I'd ever really had to pay for the consequences of my own actions. Due to the fact that it was non-adjudicated, me going back out there and living crazy again, man, I was lying to the mother of my child, going to sleep with different women, all kind of stuff, in the midst of all this. And so she ends up leaving. We end up in a knockdown, drag-out fight. She ends up leaving. But after she left, my life really went downhill after that. I started, taking sleeping pills and all that kind of stuff. One night I decided I was going to take a handful and drink a bottle of Jack Daniels behind it. So that was suicide attempt number 1. I ended up going to Rush. They wanted to pump my stomach. Dude, so I ended up, when they told me they were going to pump my stomach, I yanked tubes out and I took off on foot. I hauled butt. But I was in deep doo-doo because it was, Trazodones? Yeah, so it was a bottle full of Trazodones. I don't even know how I made it out of that hospital, excuse me. But either way, so at this point, I'm all alone. I stopped going to see my probation officer. So what happens with that? Yeah. So I ended up being picked up days before Christmas at this point.
Wow.
So days before Christmas, I ended up getting picked up, and I sit there through Christmas. I sat there through New Year's, Valentine's Day, all those little great holidays everybody wants to spend with loved ones. I was spending in the back of a jail cell. It was duly earned by some of the life choices that I was making, but and thinking about all that, that was the first time I'd picked up the Bible since Ashley, really, and so. And my mom ended up, sending a Bible that I could understand, and she sent, they ended up giving me like this pencil. It was like a pencil that was that big. You can't have the big pencil or you'll shank somebody.
And
with
it's
it.
clear in the tube.
Yeah, dude. So, and it's like this flex pen too, and I'm sitting there trying to like circle all this stuff, man. I still have that Bible, to be honest, and I looked at some of those things, through the course of this recovery. Through the course of the recovery I'm living now. And man, it was astonishing, some of the stuff that God was really speaking to me at that point in time. But, was I taking heed? For then, because I was praying for a way out, and it was just one of those things. Well, maybe if I get into the Bible, I can get out of here. So, which happened a couple more times. I got arrested for some contempts and all that kind of stuff. But My life, man, my life was nuts. So after being out for a couple of times, so I say that. Let me go back real quick because I'll jump ahead of myself. You already know how I get. Yeah, I get to talking and I get into this flow. And the next thing you know, we'll rabbit trail off and then come back. It was probably why we didn't make it out of that first part of this episode.
Well, I wasn't gonna say nothing.
Hey, ease up, fella. Ease up, fella. But man, I had a lot of fault. I felt a lot of shame and I felt a lot of guilt at the fact that the first attempt at me having a family, the one thing I said I would never do was let that fall apart, and it did. My kids were gone. The girlfriend that had intentions to marry and all this kind of stuff, she was gone, but I was a dumb kid. I was a dumb kid making dumb decisions and not really wanting to be a dad at that point in time, which wasn't fair to my kids at all because they didn't ask to be here. Yeah. So I fought myself in a lot of that, which through some of the recovery processes and step studies and stuff like that, I've talked about it, and that's in the past. I can't live there, but at the same time, I can't say it didn't bother me, because I'm still paying repercussions of my actions now for that. With two of the older kids growing up in separate households, because I couldn't keep my head on straight because I wanted to do drugs and alcohol and stuff. But it's kind of
interesting on how things kind of shift priority.
Yeah. And man, I chose drugs and alcohol over them. That part breaks my heart every time I go back and think about it. I know this is unashamed. I'm unashamed to tell the story, but I don't really feel the guilt that I felt is, the weight of it. I still feel it, but it's the weight of it. It isn't so heavy. I've tried to, here recently, not recently, over the last couple of years, I've been doing what I can to repair those relationships with my kids and explaining to them everything that, I talk about on the show or talk about in life, period. But the end result of me not reporting and being locked in that cell ended up me being in prison the first time I ever went to prison. So that's why it was really significant. It's something that's been expunged now, but at the same time, before that, man, it affected my life in so many ways.
Imagine.
And I had to live it. I had to live that down. I had to, I was just like, yeah, I got a possession charge. And they took it from a possession with intent. My lawyer ended up getting it dropped down to a simple possession. There was no way that they could just get it dropped, period, even though, I know I didn't have baggies in the car, but hey, that's neither here nor there. I was really, when you really look back on it and you start thinking about it and you start talking about it, it was inevitable. I use that word a lot in the first one. It was inevitable for that to happen. That was one of those things. I was going to get caught, period, point blank. And I think I was getting caught simple at that point in time before it got to something else. Or somebody died, or I killed somebody drinking and driving, or however you want to put it. But so, yeah, that was the first time I ended up going to prison. That was not a fun thing for a kid that grew up in the suburbs, spoiled rotten, and thought that life was just what it was. Peachy cream and, all jokes at that point. I was still pissed about Ashley dying. Still mad at God, still mad at myself, still hurting behind that. At that point, even though I had kids with somebody else, I mean, that sat there because I never dealt with it.
Yeah.
Kind of pushed down.
Yeah. It stayed submerged. Even to the fact where it did affect my relationship with the first mother of my two kids. It affected that relationship a lot because I just couldn't live in freedom from my grief, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I was steadily chasing ways to numb that. You know what I mean? And I, never really wanted to talk about it with her because I didn't want her to think she was being compared to somebody. Yeah. Which that wasn't the case at all. She's an awesome girl. Still is, even though she gets on my nerves sometimes. I'll tell her that to her face.
You want us to edit that out?
Please. Please edit that part out. I'm going to die, y'all. No, No, but seriously though, man, she put up with what she could,
Yeah.
and ultimately my drugs and alcohol and everything else ended up pushing her away. It pushed me away from a lot of people as well. The fact that, I had such a hard time being accepted in school and being accepted outside of that, that was a major catalyst for me learning how to push people away. If I felt like you were getting too close, I pushed you away. The fact that I dealt with the grief and the agony of Ashley dying, that was another another root issue that blossomed into the tree of me pushing people away.
Yeah.
Because the less that I had to have somebody, or how can I put that? The more somebody felt like I felt like somebody was getting closer to me, to not ever have to deal with the hurt of them leaving, I just went ahead and pushed away. Yeah. I would lash out with anger. I would lash out with, revenge use. If you don't know what revenge use is, I'm pretty sure you do, because we've talked about that before. But to those who don't know, revenge use is basically where somebody makes you mad and you feel like you have to go use behind that, or you feel like, oh, I'll show them, kind of situations. Yeah. There was a lot of that in my life, because, somebody pissed me off and I'd just say, well, you know what, I'll go get high. But so pushing.
Well, it's also kind of a self-sabotage.
Yeah, there was a lot of. I might as well just had a 6-shooter and shot every toe I had off at some point. You know what I mean? That's with jobs, relationships, my kids. But so skipping ahead, so there was after that, going to prison or whatever. I lived in Biloxi for a little while. I almost got married to a girl down there. That did not happen due to the fact I went back to drugs and alcohol all over again. I ended up losing the job that I had there. Matter of fact, I got arrested down there too. Yeah, so trouble followed me because I allowed it. It's just one of those things like, the choices you make, you're going to pay the consequences for them.
What's that saying? Sleep in the bed that you make?
Yeah, pretty much. And every time that I decided to make the bed, guess who had to sleep in it? Funny thing about Biloxi, though, and it really plays into it comes back around, is how this works. So I got arrested 2 times for possession of marijuana. So I never showed up for court for any of them. Instead of going to court, I ran back to Meridian. And so me running back to Meridian, that was outside of their, jurisdiction. They would not come here and pick me up, no matter if I was in jail or not. They weren't going to do it because it cost money.
Yeah.
So
they weren't going to extradite.
No, they weren't going to extradite. They were just going to leave me here, which is funny because it's just right down the road. You would think they would come, but no, they never did. Matter of fact, I think I stayed off their dockets for a while due to the fact that they had me showing up to court, but I ended up bolting out of the courtroom as soon as they gave me an opportunity. I took off. But that was more of that insane living. I was running away from issues. So that's how I ended up back in Meridian after prison. So during that time, I ended up meeting another girl, which is my youngest's mother, and she, there was girls in between all this, of course. Yeah, so I was a bit promiscuous. Yeah. You notice I stuttered when I said that.
I did.
Yeah, because I don't want to. That's one of those things. Like, can I keep this a little bit? But if we're gonna be unashamed, we're gonna tell stories. You got to tell all the dirt.
Yep.
Yeah, you gotta uncover it all. I'm so uncomfortable with that. But it is what it is.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes pulling those skeletons out of the closet. And looking at it. It's hard taking that mirror and looking at ourselves. I mean, it's hard. But, man, that's a feeling and that weight that comes off when you do it.
Honesty always feels like an attack when you don't give it its the right room to sit in.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, when it's really there for your growth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, somebody told me that once, and I can't exactly remember who said that, but man, that was one of those things. You hear these quotes, or somebody said something and it really sticks. But so anyway, so moving forward, I come back from Biloxi. I was working in restaurants. I was one of the top bartenders in Meridian. The crazy thing is during my my inventory process, I come to realize that I was a top bartender because I was drunk. 95% of the time, that I was working. So either way it goes, but man, there was this one time I was working for a pretty prestigious place in Meridian, and I was skimming off the top a little bit, and had to be honest about that. And to my sponsor for the first time, that was one of those things that was just like, oh wow, yeah, because you don't want to ever look at that for what it is, but that's exactly what happened, And I try to deny. But if we live in denial, we're never gonna ever tell the truth. We're gonna keep lying to ourselves.
And you can only live in denial for so long,
right?
So it's coming clean to anybody is tough, but man, once you coming clean to a sponsor,
yeah, because they start hitting you all upside the head with these truths, and you're just like, shut up, nobody want to hear that.
I know that. I don't need you to tell me that. I know that.
That's I still at some point need to make an amends to that facility or that establishment that's in the works, but with time that will come. But either way, so I was working in and out of bars and restaurants and stuff like that. I was a top server, top bartender, and pretty much I worked in every restaurant I think in Meridian outside of like 2, at some point in time. Which was, great. I had a following. I had some people that, man, well, where are you working at now?
Yeah.
And hearing it now, you don't realize how embarrassing that is that, you just moved around like that. You know what I mean? Like you just didn't put your feet down solid anywhere. But I can only attest that to some of the root issues I already had of not belonging. And that was me running from problems.
Yeah.
I create my own drama and then run from it. Crazy stuff, man. But so anyway, I ended up meeting, my youngest's mom. Then we hit it off really well, but we hit it off really well, probably for the wrong reasons. Pretty girl, but she liked to drink, and her liking to drink, I like to drink, but of course, I like to do all the other additives along with it, and still didn't want to give none of that up. So we lived in a friend of mine's bedroom. The two of us lived in one bedroom in a tiny apartment. I mean, it was tiny, and that stayed that way for the first year or so, first 2 years. Then we moved into our own place, and then we got really vindictive and abusive towards each other. We were, we'd fist fight, call each other names, all this kind of stuff, man. It got pretty bad at one point to where, I went to jail for domestic violence. Not once, but twice. But then, her noticing that anytime she could call the cops, I could go to jail. She ended up calling them every time there was an argument. It didn't matter. Yeah. The relationship itself was volatile. What's the word everybody uses now? Toxic. It was toxic. Not making a joke of it, but it was what it was. But but we ended up, for some odd reason, man, we kept drifting back towards each other, which it was either the comfortability of lifestyle, because I could accept her drinking, she could accept my drug use, no matter if I was hiding in the bathroom or whatever it was. But yeah, so we ended up having a child. He was planned, to fix the relationship. But lo and behold, it didn't fix anything. The only thing that would have fixed it was both of us getting the help that we needed. But that's not how that happened.
Yeah.
So along comes my youngest, who is he's a fireball of energy. You know him all too well. Matter of fact, you say he acts a bit like me. So
yeah,
which is pretty it's crazy how calm I'm staying for the podcast, because most of the time I'm bouncing over the walls too, and I
just like him.
Wait a minute.
So you've taken us through this with these different arrests, and I know we could probably sit here and we could go on for another hour about a lot of these different situations in your life.
Yeah.
And I know in the timeline that we're getting pretty close to where you started kind of coming to the end.
Yeah.
And so what did that end look like for you? What was the catalyst that got you headed toward the direction of getting help?
All right. So that's we were talking about some of the final arrest with the domestics or the 2 domestic violences. So with that ended up coming a night where I decided I was going to take some Xanaxes. That happened first. So what ended up happening, there was this guy that kept calling our house. Brittany had stepped out on our relationship, within the timeline, before Jasper was born. So this guy was calling, man, that's my kid, da 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 da. He just kept on. He was adamant about it, and man would ride by the house, terrorize us a little bit. Just one of those people just wouldn't stop until his point was made. So then I finally got fed up with it. It was one night that I'd taken some footballs. I had a taste for those things. But so I'd taken some footballs, and it was pretty much barred out at this point. So he called again, and I knew where he lived. So I just went to his house, knocked on the door, told him, look, dude, stop calling our house. Yeah. Stop bothering me. Stop. I thought I was doing what I could to protect our family, but the whole time I should have never took my butt over there in the first place. Hindsight's 20/20. But anyway, so he kept calling, kept on with the back and forth. And I know I don't want to get us in time constraints again. So
no, you're good.
So what ended up happening was he ended up saying something smart. And, I spit in his face, and then we ended up in a fist fight right there at the doorway. His roommate comes up. He has a baseball bat. So I kind of, I was like, all right, look, we're done. He just needs to stop calling the house and all that kind of stuff. Just stop harassing. You know what I mean? Like I said, probably shouldn't have my butt over there anyway. So I'm going to my car, and I feel when I'm swinging the bat, you could feel the wind. Wow. Yeah, you could feel the wind off this dude. And I was just like, oh, right. So that's what we're going to do. So I get in the car, and they're starting to hit the car with the baseball bat. So finally, I just put the thing in drive, ran both of them over. I ended up paying the price for that. I ended up getting aggravated assault with a deadly weapon because I ended up running them over with the car. So in the midst of all this, the last mother of my child, we're still having our issues. So she ends up calling the cops again. I end up going for a 3rd domestic violence in the middle of all this. And this time the argument happened in front of my child. So there was a lot of grief from the cop about that. I ended up, matter of fact, I kind of took off through the woods at first for that one. So what ended up happening with that is, a week or two later, they came back by the house, picked me up for the aggravated assault and the domestic violence. Mm. So I get locked up in the county. There ain't no way out this time, So I thought that, but then they ended up giving me a bond on the aggravated assaults, which in turn my lawyer worked it to where I could be out on the domestics. So, but Brittany called the cops when I didn't mean to put her name out there. Try to keep everybody's say scratch that. You didn't hear that.
We'll put in a little censor bleep.
Beep. But either way it goes, she ends up calling the cops again because she already knew what was over my head. And this was one of her, like, I could kind of tell you type of situations due to the alcohol use and all that kind of stuff. So what ended up happening with that was they ended up taking me to jail. This time that, I didn't have a bond, period. Didn't have a bond whatsoever.
So that was while you were out on the other bond.
I was out on one bond, and if you already know how the system works, if you're out on one bond and you get picked up for something else, whether somebody calls or, for some odd reason, man, I wouldn't even have to touch her, and she'd call. But I guess it was due to the fact she'd call so much that they just felt like you separate the two of them, and so I ended up going to jail for that one. But we did. That was a pretty bad argument though. The way that went, and I can't even sugarcoat it. Like, she ended up biting my ear in two, and I ended up face palming her. Yeah. So that was pretty bad. So I could try to downplay that as much as I want to, but it was pretty serious. Like I said, that happened in front of my child. You know, man, it was insane because I was still in coke. I was still, using meth at this point in time. I was just out there, but this was one of those moments where I was trying to, work two jobs and bring money home for the family or whatnot. But the whole thing is like, I was trying to quit at this point, and it was just like, you know what, if you're going to keep drinking, then I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do it. But either way.
Making those excuses.
Yeah, I did. Well, if you're going to do this, I'm going to do that.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay, we got to tell ourselves whatever it takes to keep us into that cycle.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny how easy it is to talk yourself into it. Oh, well, it ain't that bad. She's drunk, Yeah. So that was, if you're going to do that, I'm going to do this, But I was faulting her for drinking in front of the child, but the whole time, I was doing my thing.
Yeah.
But it was never in front of him. I could say that much, but it didn't make it any better because I was still being an irresponsible parent. Now, to go further into that, like I said, she ends up calling the cops. The cops ended up coming. So at this point, I get taken back to jail, go in front of the judge. The judge is like, no bond. And then I go back in front of the judge. He's like, yeah, I got a bond, $100,000. I was like, so I called my dad and I was like, so it's $100,000. He said, yeah, no. He said, let me ask you this. Were you drinking? Yeah. Were you using? Man, why are you asking me all this? Are you going to help me out or not? It turned into one of those situations. Still I was ungrateful, for the help that I did get. So, I mean, he was pretty much, I'd wrote me off. Yeah. Knowing who I am right now, or being who I am now, knowing an addict's lifestyle, I'd have wrote me off too. Because there was nothing changing. Yeah. There was no change. The saying I use all the time. What is it? Put you on the spot, got you. No, so if nothing changes, nothing changes. Yeah, I did that to you. I got you then. But yeah, it's that whole saying, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So if you don't change that one little thing, how do you expect change in the bigger part?
That's right.
Change starts small. And I wasn't even trying to make the small changes. If it was a small change, it was only for a moment. Then I was going back to doing the same stupid stuff already, But either way it goes. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this point, 20 years. 20 years. Due to the fact that even though the possession of cocaine had been expunged, it was still popping up. It shouldn't have popped up, but it did pop up because the DA knew who I was, and so old Southern courtrooms, the whispers behind the door, pretty much kind of that deal was happening. So anyway, I'm sitting there looking at 20 years. Once again, I'm pissed off at God. I'm pissed off at myself. I'm pissed off at everybody who I think has fault in it, not still pointing the finger at me. Yeah. It's everybody else's fault, not my fault. Well, my dad would just get me out of here. I know I could work my case. So I ended up with a pro bono lawyer, one of those, a court-appointed lawyer at this point. My dad wasn't paying for a lawyer. He wasn't doing anything. However you figure it out, son, is how you figure it out. That's why I think he told me one time. And he had every right to say that. Either way it goes, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, I'm never going to see the light of day. My son's going to be this age by the time I see him again. My kids are going to be grown, and I was in the pit at that point. I was just like, you know what? I'll never see my kids grow up. That's when it really started to switch for me. That was when the mindset had to change. But like I said, I was still mad at God. I was still mad at the world. I was still mad at everybody. But what ended up happening was, man, there was this guy that was in there, and he was doing what he called prayer call at nights. So anything you need to pray, that you wanted him to pray for, he'd pray for it. Just call it out. He'd get all these guys together that were in one single pod. There was like, at that point, the jail was overcrowded, so there was like 45 of us in one pod. And if you know Lauderdale County Jail, that's not a whole bunch of room. I think each pod is supposed to hold like 20 people or something like that. So we were doubled up. Yeah. So he was calling prayer calls and stuff like that. So there's all these guys that were screaming out, prayer requests. And I'm just like, man, this stuff ain't gonna work, dude. You know what I mean? Like, I'm pissed. It's just like, you know what? And then so he'd come to me, man. I just wanted to, God sent me your way, man. He wants me to pray for you. I said, if you don't get out of my cell with all that God stuff, nobody wants to hear that mess right now. It's like, dude, get out of here. Yeah. And then, so he would do these morning, Bible study things where he would sit up there and he'd talk about pieces of the Bible, what it meant to him and how it actively means that, we're in the belly of the beast right now and God's calling us to come out. He wants us to do something that we're not paying attention to it. And I remember that him saying that he's asking for you to do something. Let me tell you about Jonah and the whale. That was one of those, I was just like, that was just stupid. Shut up, man. Because he ain't making no sense, because it was just another story. But what ended up really starting to dig in is that he started talking about a Bible story that Ashley went in depth on. And so it was just like, So I started paying attention to what he was saying a little bit because I was trying to see if it was going to match up to what I already knew because, I was looking for faults in it. Yeah. But this go ahead.
No, I just want to say, like you said, listening, like, hey, if his story don't match up, hey, he's crazy and I ain't gonna listen to it.
Pretty much. Yeah. Pretty much. I was looking for a way out, And let me say this real quick. It doesn't matter how many times you try to run from God, or it doesn't matter how many times that you don't want to believe. He's going to make it to where you have to sit down and face him, no matter how much you run from him. And this is one of those sit down and face him moments. But either way, so he started talking about, Zechariah and the tree and all that kind of stuff. He started talking, he started telling me all these other stories. And so I was just like, all right, so he's pretty spot on, and so come here, Drew, let me talk to you real quick. I was like, man, don't nobody want to talk to you. Yeah, no, man, have a seat. So I'm just like, no, man, miss me with all that. I was like, dude, I'm facing 20 years. Ain't nobody. I was like, all I'm trying to do is get on the phone real quick, see if I can get a lawyer. Yeah. He's like, so you want me to pray for you to have a lawyer? And it's like, dude, don't nobody want you to pray for none of that. Like, go on about your business, and then finally, man, he comes in my cell talking all this mess, and finally I just got to the point I was like, dude, come back in here again. We're gonna have to fight. Like, I'm asking you to back off, leave me alone. Man, no, man, he ain't gonna fight me. He starts smiling. I'm just like, you don't know me too well. Come back in here. Yeah. It's going down. But, man, so it's in there right around Christmas time. It seemed to be the time of year for me to go to jail every time. But either way, so, they started talking about, the Christmas story. They start handing out these little bitty Bibles. And, of course, I was, trying to find it on my own at this point. I wanted to read just a little bit, just something to pray about or talk to God, even though I was mad. I was like, you know what? This ain't even going to work. I gave up, threw the Bible to the side. So, man, one guy went in to go get a sentence, he was supposed to be facing, I think he had 50 years over his head. But him and this guy had been praying about it, and I was just like, so I'm eavesdropping a little bit, it's not hard to do. So he was, man, you prayed for me, man. I only ended up with 5, man. I was like, hold up. This dude had 50 years over his head and he only ends up with 5. Like, what? Yeah. Hold on.
Yeah. Let me see about this.
What do you, wait a minute. What do you mean? Yeah. So either way it goes, this guy, I said, finally we start talking a little bit, man, I know you're mad. I ain't gonna bother you too much. Starts, giving me a little tidbit. So, what questions you got? Starts asking me questions, and I start asking him questions. And every question that I asked, he had a biblical reference for.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even have the Bible open at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, well, hold on. You talking about your kids. Right here. He mentioned a scripture about kids. Oh, well, you say that you're mad at God. To Job.
Yeah.
And he starts going off there. And then every time I say anything, he was like, hold on. So what he was doing was giving me biblical principle that he already knew.
Yep.
And in answer form, because if it was coming from him personally, I'd have been totally done with it, right? So either way it goes, to speed the story along. So he hit me with a story one time. So finally, I started sitting down and listening to the Bible studies. That was where it started. Started listening to the Bible studies. Started going to prayer calls because I was in a no hope situation. So something's gonna have to work. Because I couldn't get my parents on the phone anymore. Didn't nobody want to talk to me on the phone anymore. Friends that I thought I had weren't answering the phone anymore.
Yeah.
All my dope friends, I ain't got no money for you. I remember phone calls like that. Man, I can't help you out.
Yeah.
They didn't even want to write, talk, nothing. They didn't want no part of it. They were done with it. Or, man, I got you. I got you. Man, just wait till Wednesday.
Yeah.
Wednesday come, nothing. Either way, so I was looking for something at this point, whether I believed it or not.
Yeah.
So I started talking to this guy, and we're having these conversations, and he starts doing these Bible studies. He starts doing these prayer calls, and I'm starting. Hey, well, I just want to pray about my kids, man. That's it. Make sure they're all right, because I've written myself off.
Yeah.
So then I started having more questions, and he started coming up with more answers, and then finally it got to the point to where I was inertly listening to the Bible studies, like trying to learn a lot out of the Bible studies and trying to learn a lot out of the prayer calls. And then finally I started praying. I started praying for help. Let me get rid of this. I don't want to use drugs anymore. I don't want to do this again. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be angry. I was tired of being mad. Being mad is exhausting.
It is.
And being mad at the world is exhausting. I started praying about that. Started praying for whatever was in me to make me so hateful to go away. I started praying about all these things. And slowly there was a shift that was starting to happen. I didn't know it at that point.
Yeah.
But man, the guy was he was getting his sentence. He was facing, I think 25 years. He ended up with 10. He was a habitual offender. So him being a habitual, only getting 10 in a day, he was supposed to have like close to life at this point, just from being a habitual offender. And so I was like, man, what do you pray about? Started talking to him about that kind of stuff. What do you pray about? And so this is ultimately the change that was starting to happen little by little.
Yeah.
It was first Bible reading, second prayer, third me trying to gain all the information that I could about how to talk to God a little bit better so I could understand. And I did it for the wrong reason at first, but it became the right reason towards the end of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the wrong reason being it was selfish intent and desire, right? But by the end of it, man, I was praying for everybody in that pod. But we're not there yet. So I know me and my storytelling, dude. I know. But so either way it goes. So we started talking about, his departure, because once you get your sentence, you're pretty much, you're due to go at any point.
Yeah.
He was like, man, God, man, he came to me in a dream. He said, you the one that's going to be leading these Bible studies and prayer calls. I started laughing. I belly laughed so hard. I was like, me? Man, get out of here, dude. But, I finally ended up in a cell by myself. They started riding these people out, at this point. Right around Christmas time, they didn't ride anybody out of there. So they started riding these people out. They start taking off. They're going to Rankin up the road. They're going to that land, is what they're saying. So either way it goes, I'm sitting there, and I start praying. and I'm reading the Bible. I get to this part in John where it says, "Do you want to be made well?" It's the guy that's sitting at the pool of Bethesda. The angel comes down, touches the water, spins it around, and then everybody who touches that water, the person who gets put in that water is blessed. Yep. So the man, 38 years had been sitting there. God knew all of his troubles. He
couldn't get to that water.
Couldn't get to the water. He watched everybody else get their blessing.
Yep.
So does that sound familiar? You're watching everybody else get the blessing, but you don't know how to get to the water, and Jesus is standing right in front of you, asking you, "Do you want to be made well?" So I personalized that. It's one of those. As I'm reading this, I was, they say in certain parts of the Bible, put your name there. Anywhere where it says I or you or put your name there. This is how this guy was telling me. I'm sorry, I'm boring with my story, sir. Yeah.
Hey, it's past my bedtime, man.
Man, I understand. We did start this a little late. But so either way, to pop this back up, either way it goes. So I started reading this part in the story, and I was just like, I got to the part where he's like, "Do you want to be made well?" Yeah. And I was like, "Drew, do you want to be made well?" I was like, "You know what? I do.
Yeah.
Tears started rolling, man. It was one of those things where it was just instant. That was a God encounter, and I didn't realize it. But so he ends up leaving. I end up doing prayer call. I end up doing Bible study.
Wind up taking it.
I ended up doing it. God told him,
Yeah.
Something, and it was just something that was. Because for a minute it stopped completely, and I was like, "All right, this don't even feel natural. Like this don't feel right."
Yeah.
Nobody's praying for nobody. Nobody's talking about God. Nobody's talking about this. And so me facing 20 years, I ended up only with a year and a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And one of the charges ended up getting dropped due to the fact they didn't have any witnesses, and that was the aggravated assault with intent. With
the vehicle?
Yeah, with the car. That was me running the guys over. So craziest thing ever, because I was really expecting to go down for that.
Yeah.
So that ended up being tossed out, and so I only did the year and the day. So basically, altogether, I did 7 months.
Yeah, because probably from all the time you was already in there.
Yeah. Yep.
Man.
So, dude, it was crazy. That was, and so after that, I started to change, and that's when we get into the episode 4 in season 1, the relapse. But so I go to jail. I wound up going to Parchment. I get out, and so outside of that, I end up coming to CR. I sat here, man. I enjoyed it. The music, the songs.
For y'all that don't know, CR, Celebrate Recovery, Christ-centered, 12-step program. Hey, I'm a part of that too. It's worked for me. So yeah. All right, continue.
But so, God had done so much in my life at that point in time. I was starting to give back. I was starting to talk about it. I was starting to put in God's service work at this point.
Yeah.
And so I was really, man, everything was starting to shape up. And life was starting to change. It was little changes that led there, right? It wasn't nothing that was just impactful, and I was sitting there just like, I've got to make this major change right now.
Yeah.
It had been falsified. It was little increments of things that were starting to change. My mindset, the way I spoke, the way I treated people, and everything else started to change. So ultimately, what changed then was how I acted outside of that in society. So I started helping out teens and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that was when I ultimately started to get really involved in CR. And that's when I ended up starting to take over a leadership role somewhat. They weren't so sure yet because I was still new.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I think I met you my 3rd month in CR. That was when, it was still upstairs.
Yeah, because like I was here, and then I left on my own relapse, and came back and relapsed again. So yeah, that's a story for another time.
But so the thing was, I was starting to understand. I was starting to understand people. I was starting to deal.
Yeah.
But then I was living back at my dad's house, so I was having to adhere to his rules.
Yeah.
Due to the fact, I was on house arrest at that point, so that was the only address I had. That once I got off of house arrest, it started to go downhill. The arguments started back between us. He just didn't really believe in the whole, like, oh, well, he has changed thing. He could see snippets of change. He could see that there was some growth and maturity there. He could see that there was a need for me not to go back to using drugs. But I started putting myself around people, places, and things that I shouldn't have been around. Old friends, old places I used to go to, clubs, bars, whatnot. I wasn't drinking initially at that time, but, that's where it was leading to. And because I wasn't strong enough, first off. I didn't have any tools still. I had God.
Yeah.
I prayed about it, and I'm not saying God ain't strong enough, but I wasn't relying on him.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
You got to.
But there was a point to where I just wasn't relying on God.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I knew better to not go to these places, get in the Bible, keep reading, keep doing this. But sometimes, just like in that story, where he's talking about the man being made well, once you turn and you turn away from Jesus and you go back into the crowd, people are going to start questioning your faith. They're going to start questioning who healed you. They're going to start questioning what made you stronger. They're going to start questioning the person that you are because they know who you are, Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, I got all those questions. Man, I don't think he's for real. Da 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 da.
Yeah.
And then me and my dad started having more fights, and the anger started to come back because I still had the resentment towards him. I still had the resentment of things that were on the outside. So what ended up happening with that was I started drinking again, and then I stopped talking to my sponsor, NCR. But they were kind of going on their own relapse as well. So I stopped talking to him. I stopped coming to meetings. I stopped listening to anything. So I lost my job with the city at that point in time. And I was doing community development. So I was helping out teams. I was, doing some other things there with the community stuff. That was fun. It was a fun job for me. I ended up losing that because I could not stay clean. Didn't want to stay sober. There was a situation with Jasper, or my youngest son, his mom, and so what ended up happening with that, she ended up losing custody, and I thought I was going to gain custody, that I was on an automatic for that, but, of course, I already had some issues with, as far as me going to jail and all that kind of stuff had to be worked out. So my parents were awarded temporary guardianship custody.
Okay.
So I, adamantly was trying to fight back for that, but in the midst of me starting to use alcohol and drugs again, they didn't really want me to be a part of that, and I can understand why.
Yep.
Because obviously we know how insane my life got to the fact that it sent me to prison twice, and I had 158 arrests. So that's real smart. Let's put him with that guy. But my life was not the same. I will say that it wasn't the same insanity. You know what I mean? It was drifting back that way, but it wasn't the same.
Yeah.
But ultimately, God knew what he was doing. And I have to trust that. So, me losing custody of him kind of set me over the edge. And I started having to, I was trying to do steps while I was steadily drinking. The whole thing was with that is because other people were, drinking and doing steps, and I was just going to follow the crowd.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to follow myself. I was going to follow the crowd on that. And so that was my first failed step study, because I ended up getting to step 4 and running up out of here.
A lot of people do.
Yeah. Well, and there was a lot of talks with the pastor and stuff like that, and all, I stopped wanting to even come to church. So, the thing about that is that ultimately led to that relapse story.
Yeah.
Where I ended up doing one thing I said I would never do, and that was shooting up. Ended up trying to kill myself twice in that moment. Ended up living homeless. Ended up living without water, food. Couldn't even bathe unless I was going to my parents' house to bathe. But I was living in an abandoned house, pretty much in Quitman, which it wasn't really abandoned at first. I just stopped paying the bills on it, and the roommates moved out. But they were trying their best to give me a hand up. I just wasn't taking it.
Yeah.
You know, they were really trying to reach in, you know, dude. So we see you're a little different than how you came out. You were talking about God and doing all this other stuff. What's changed, you know?
Yeah.
Dude, I was shooting up. I was in the midst of the worst relapse I've ever had. You know, yeah, I table tapped. So that's probably going to be all over the microphone. I shouldn't have done that. Right. Y'all get on to me all the time about that.
It don't feel good.
Well,
but so
I fidget.
So, you know, you hit this big relapse.
The rock bottom
and
is what it was.
Yeah, definitely. So what was that coming out of that rock bottom? What got you back into your recovery?
So I started thinking about my kids, you know, but that wasn't just the driving factor. You know, I didn't want to feel the way I felt anymore. You know, I was like, God brought me so far, and here I am giving up on myself. You know, because I'm wanting to live with the guilt. I'm holding on to resentment, and I'm holding on to all this anger. But why though? Why? You know, and I wanted answers. Man, I wrote an 11-page letter to God. Well, it was 11 to 14 pages. Still got it. You know, I still read it from time to time to see where I was at. But the fact that everybody was starting to give up on me again, you know, people were starting to see that, hey, man, it was all false. And, you know, not to prove people wrong, but, I mean, it was just a whole fact of I knew better.
Yeah.
I wanted my kids to have better. I wanted to have better. I wanted to be a better person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so there were so many changes I had to make. But, you know, I had to be disciplined in those changes. So, man, it got to the point to where I didn't think I was going to come out of this relapse. I didn't think my mind was ever going to be right again. I didn't think I was going to, you know, man, ultimately I thought I was going to die. You know, I got to the point to where I'd been up for 14 days straight. In that 14 days straight, I started hearing voices.
Yeah.
I thought people were after me. Man, and I didn't want to go back, you know, didn't want to go back to jail, didn't want any of that lifestyle. So I knew I had to start making more changes, but how do I make the change? How do I be a successful drug user and be a successful person at the same time? How?
Yeah.
Where does that happen?
Insanity.
It doesn't, dude. You know, and that's just one of the things. Like, I was like, something's got to give. What is the underlying factor for all this, for me to have to give this up? So I got to my parents' house, and, you know, and at this point I've thrown, you know, I ended up throwing a meth pipe out of my car, full of dope. I mean, that thing was packed full of dope. And as a matter of fact, I had the baggie, stuffed it in the stem, threw it out of the car, got out of the car, busted it and make sure it was broken, and just kind of grinding my foot into it. And that was me saying, hey, look, because I'd been sleeping in the car.
Yeah.
I've been sleeping in an abandoned house. I was like, I cannot live like this. I couldn't even see my kids. You know what I mean? So I'm sitting there. And this was the straw that broke the camel's back, was the fact that I was sitting in my mom's house, you know, knowing I needed to get sober. She's trying to feed me. Apparently, you know, I was, man, my clothes were falling off of me. You know, naturally, I'm a big guy. You know, I think I was weighing every bit of like 175 pounds.
Oof.
You know, and normally I'm, you know, weighing 2 something.
Yeah.
You know, so either way it goes, she was just like, oh, you need to eat. I got this meatloaf. Like, she was trying to be nice about it, but she was just like, eat something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Man, I think I sat there and looked at that plate and danced around on that meatloaf for about 15 minutes, just sitting there with a fork. And then finally I was like, why are you trying to feed me? And I was starting to lose it on my mom because I'd been up for so long and I hadn't had no sleep. So I'm thinking she's plotting against me. So I'm like hollering at her, the house, anybody that I thought was in the house. You know, I was like, I know y'all are back there in the closets, you know. Dude, I'm losing it. Losing it. Walking outside screaming at the woods, you know what I mean? Because I thought people were out there waiting on me to screw up or do something. As soon as I left, I was going to get arrested. That was my mindset.
Yeah.
Man, my daughter comes out of the back room. Scared to death. Looks me dead in my face, tears in her eyes, and she was just like, are you going to go back to jail? Broke my back. So I sat there and I cried. I cried and I cried and I cried. I cried. Man, I ain't never seen a look in my child's face like that, and I hate the fact that she ever saw me like that.
Yeah.
You know,
I can imagine. Man.
I can imagine to fight tears right now because for her to see me like that, and she understood that something ain't right with my dad.
Yeah.
You know, my mom ends up, oh, well, I got to take Caitlin to dance practice, is how she ended up leaving the house. And my mom left, she left with my daughter because I was obviously not sane, right? So my dad ends up coming home. He was like, son, so what's up? What's wrong with you? Man, I broke down. I broke all the way down. I was like, it's drugs. He was like, what? I guess I kind of caught him by surprise because I lied to him for so long, you know. And, you know, in his mind, he didn't know where I was at. He, you know, it was just one of those things. We'd already been arguing. I'd already been kicked out of the house again due to the fact that he already saw me going back down that road. And so he was just like, one more time. Well, so tell me what's going on. I said, I'm on freaking drugs. Of course, it wasn't freaking drugs. You know, I was just like, I'm on drugs, and I don't know how to stop. I don't know what's wrong with me. I just want to stop. He was like, what? I said, I want to stop. You know, and so he ends up calling the, I guess the director of Weems at this point. You know, I hear him on the phone and say, what do I need to do for him? He says he wants to quit, and I'm sitting there and I'm trying to, you know, figure out how to light the cigarette inside the house. Of course, yeah, it was smoking in my parents' house, but I wasn't all there, man. So I go outside and I'm lighting a cigarette. Next thing I see is a cop car coming down the road, and I was like, man, I just told this dude the truth, and he calls the freaking cops. So they pull up. It's two of them. They pull up. But I can't remember the exact logo on the car, but they versus CIT.
Yeah,
is that what it is? So they were the CIT guys, is what they were. I didn't know this. All I saw was two sheriff cars, and so I see these two sheriff cars, and I'm automatically like finna lose it. I'm like, Dad, I just told you the freaking truth, man. You know, they pull up, and I'm wanting to run. I'm ready to jet, ready to bolt. But I didn't, you know, of course. I mean, I ended up staying there, or I wouldn't be here where I am right now. But the guy, man, he talked me down. Thank you for those guys, to be honest, you know, in that situation. Because without him talking to me the way he did to get me to finally calm down, because my nerves were on edge. I was already freaking out. I had already been freaking out that entire day, you know, but I was tired. Once again, still hadn't eaten. Still ain't drank nothing. All I did was smoke cigarettes the entire day. You know, we ain't taking you to jail, man. It's just, talk to me for a minute. What do you want? I was like, I've been shooting up meth. Man, that meth's some bad stuff, ain't it? Some bad stuff. I was like, yes, sir. It is. Man, well, so let's get you cleaned up, man. I was like, I just took a shower. That's what I told him. You know, because I mean, I didn't want to go anywhere with him.
Yeah.
You know, and I was trying to like back out of it as much as I could, and I was just like, well, you know, and I even got mad at my dad. I was like, this ain't the help I asked for. I was like, I asked you for help, and you called the cops. He was like, they're taking you to a place where you can get some help. I can't help you here. You know, so I ended up going to what they call the CSU.
Yeah.
Crisis Stabilization Unit in Newton. Stay there, man, 10 days. I acted a fool the entire 10 days. Because, I mean, I was detaxing, you know, and I was coming off of it. Man, I was trying to do everything I could to get back out there. So that was April 19th. That was April 18th was my last day to use. April 19th was the day that I consider my clean date. So, April 19th. I'm coming back up on one, and that'll be my 3 years at that point. So, moving, you know. That's right. But either way it goes, that was the beginning of the end of drugs, the beginning of my recovery, true recovery. You know, true recovery with God infused in it all the way through it.
That's right.
So I ended up going to Weems. I sat at Weems for, you know, I did the 90-day program. I ended up leaving in 80 days. I got into another fight, of course, but you know. it wasn't really a fight. I just got on the guy's nerves because he was in a situation to where he was having to be there. I was in a situation to where I was healing to be there.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. He had to be there. I think he was on drug court or something like that. So they made him go to rehab. Me, it was my choice to be at rehab. So I was enjoying every minute of it. And so me trying to enjoy it, I was trying to get other people to enjoy it too.
Yeah.
But everybody don't see it like that. Some other, ex-addicts, whatever you want to call them, they get annoyed real quick.
Most definitely. Yeah. So you got back into recovery and you started getting back, and that's when you came back into Celebrate Recovery, and I remember you came back in working the program, and man, what a difference that has made. I want you to tell everybody and go into what you're doing now as far as the things that you're doing to stay sober and that service work that you're doing to help feed your sobriety and feed your recovery, but also to help others.
So service work, man, that's a big one. That's the big tool, because the more you give back, the more you stay in. Right now, I'm going into life coaching. That's a big one. But the life coaching is not, just for monetary value. Matter of fact, the life coaching I'm doing right now is actually scot-free. Maybe it'll be a thing later, but right now I'm just trying my best to help other people stay encouraged in their recovery. Not even just stay encouraged in recovery. Man, there's people that are out there that right now, they'll give me a call, and they want the help to get to a rehab and stuff like that. I sponsor some people as well. I got like 4 sponsees right now that stay in constant contact, man. And it's about giving back to recovery institutions as well. I stay in touch with Weems, and for a while there, East Mississippi, I was doing the drug and alcohol counseling there.
Yeah.
And also I was working as peer support. So peer support being somebody who's like-minded through addiction and stuff like that, that's been there, that's done it, that's been in institutions, that can actually help you, talk you through what you're going through.
I got you.
And also act as a not a therapist per se, but just that encouragement. Hey, look, I've been here, I've done this. Don't be scared about the process. It's just a process, and you're going to work through it, still doing that, on the side, touch and go. But, the real thing that's helping me stay the course is the fact that, gaining some accountability partners, getting that system, that net of people, man. If they see me out somewhere and they see it, if they ever caught me with a drink in my hand, I'd probably be punched in the face on the spot. I make sure I can get a violent group, dude. You know what I mean? The more volatile, the better. No, I'm kidding. No, man, honestly, though, the people who do support me in my recovery, they are a blessing.
Yeah.
Whether they were pass and go people, meaning that they were there for a moment and they're not. But those people, there's people who've dug in and made themselves root. So I consider root people, branch people, leaf people. Some people are there to be the root, go up the tree a little bit. Some people are there to extend a hand at the branch. Some people are there for a moment and they go. Those are the leaves, and the root people in my system, man, that's where the heart is, I've got a strong support system, and even my dad, it's crazy. It's our relationship has been, we've made up, that we still have. It still has to be an understanding made or compromise made in some areas. But a lot of it is sometimes I'm still trying to get rid of some of these addict behaviors. So I have some unlearned, or I'm trying to unlearn some behaviors that I have, and he's understanding now that we've talked about it. Not only that, through trying to stay accountable to myself, I've started working on myself a lot. Journaling, telling myself 10 positive things a day. And then encouraging other people with those same positive things. Not even just for me, but just giving them some insight. Hey, look, man, life doesn't have to look like this. Change the perspective of it. Right. But the big thing is, man, staying in the meeting.
Most definitely.
When we were talking about staying clean and how I'm doing that, man, I make a meeting every Monday. Sometimes I'll make meetings with NA, AA, just when time allows. But really, man, I stay busy. My kids are a big part of my life, and I try to explain to them and be honest enough with them to their understanding, the level of understanding that they have of what drugs and alcohol can do to people.
That's right.
What some of the bad decisions, no matter how small and minute it might seem right now, causes a ripple effect throughout the rest of your life. So, and don't pay attention to the negative things you tell yourself. That's a big thing, that people do, and especially us as addicts. Man, we beat ourselves up.
That's right. Most definitely.
We really kick our own butt.
We hold on to the bad stuff.
Well, I mean, so what we see, me and you could have a conversation. You could say, "Oh, Drew, well, you need to comb your hair a little bit or something, whatever it is." You know what I'm saying? That takes it for an addict or somebody who used to be an addict who's normally speaking negatively to self. They're gonna say, "That joker just said I was ugly."
Yep.
That's totally not what I said. I was just telling you to comb your hair right there. No, the whole thing's ruined. You know what I mean? You ever do that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Man, that's
all the time.
Negative self-talk. Our subconscious believes it and then exaggerates it. So it perverts it, so to speak.
Yep.
But, man.
Well, hey, and you can also add that you adding to what you're doing in your service work. You can add to that list co-host of the Unashamed Recovery podcast, reaching millions of people.
It's still fresh for me.
Yeah, I know it.
This season, man, it's been great. It's been awesome to get on here and actually tell my story. For those people who haven't heard it. For those who, man, there's been people, man, that have supported me through this recovery process. It's not short lived. This is a lifetime thing.
Yep.
But they're backing me every time. Man, we're proud of you, dude. And it's not about the back pats. It's really not. I'm thankful for those people because it is encouraging to hear that, because there are days, boy, there are some days when you're just like, I give up.
Yep.
I don't want to do this. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. But those days when you push through that next day, you really appreciate going through that. And the fact that other people see how hard you're working, at it, and they appreciate it too. That's a big thing, man.
Yes.
And so that's why my service work is a big thing, because me encouraging other people who've been there, the people who were just starting out, who remind me of what it was to be there. Sometimes I think, man, I'm not making any progress. We've had that discussion.
Yes, we have.
When you realize, oh, dude, we're making tons of progress. So either way.
And so, Drew, as we close out, man, that's what it's all about. With your story starting basically at birth, struggling with that identity, struggling with purpose, later having to deal with anger and all that grief from the loss of some loved ones, and to go into, that full-blown addiction that led into homelessness, and then to end up where you are at today. Man, that's so amazing. Like, I say this on every episode, but man, that you're a lighthouse to others who are out there struggling and in that darkness of addiction. And man, that's awesome, and I'm so proud of you. As we close out, man, if anybody wants to reach out to you, maybe for some help or to ask a question, or maybe there's another recovery podcast out there that wants to get you on, not as a co-host, but as a guest, tell everybody how they can reach you the best way. Email, Facebook, whatever it may be.
So you can reach me on Facebook. My page is Drew Smith. It's got in parentheses Biscuit. That's a childhood nickname. We're not going to talk about why. But either way, so there's that, or there's BISCUIT, Biscuit, 5069 at gmail.com. That's another way. And that's pretty much it.
And you can always email the podcast and talk with Drew or me, and that's at unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. And so, Drew, man, it was a pleasure to tell your story twice.
Yeah, pretty much.
And
well, we know that I'm long-winded. So.
Yes, we do. And so with that, guys, that's all the time we got for the day. Peace out. And with that, y'all, that's all the time we have for today. We hope that today's episode has shined some ray of hope and encouragement for you. We hope that it has inspired you to not give up, and that you too can have a life outside of addiction and can have lasting sobriety.
Recovery fam, don't forget that you can always join us for more recovery conversations on Twitter. Find us at Unashamed Recovery, and also use the hashtag Recovery Posse to connect with thousands and thousands of others in the Twitter recovery community worldwide.
Do you want to be on the show to share your amazing story with listeners from around the world like our guest today did?
Or maybe simply you want to tell us how we're doing. Or do you have any suggestions or questions for me for the show?
Send the show an email at unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. That's unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com.
Thank you for your continued support of the podcast, and I hope you all continue to stay sober. And until next time, we love you, and y'all remember to be unashamed.